Explore today's must-have trends and innovative styles at Mrs. B's Clearance and Outlet. Shop one-of-a-kind finds in today's must-have trends. Explore wall-to-wall deals, furniture, flooring, mattresses, home accents, seasonal favorites, and more. Discover unique new home decor, pillows, accessories, and more. There's something perfect for your style and budget. There's new inventory every day at up to 80% off suggested retail. Discover the style and savings of Mrs. B's Clearance and Outlet.
Dislike the thought of your address, phone number, and your family's information being sold online? Imagine having your own private detective who scours the internet for data brokers selling your personal info. When they find it in the wrong hands, they help you take it back. McAfee Plus is just like that. A private detective helping you take control of your data and privacy. Get all-in-one protection with McAfee Plus and learn how to protect your everything at McAfee.com/podcast.
Well, welcome everyone to the Media Roundtable podcast, where we talk to leading voices across the podcast and audio universe about what they create, why they create it, and the impact they want it to have on the world. Now, this is a special show, partly because it's a new installment in our industry edition, where we go a little bit further behind the scenes to talk about the business of audio and some of the secrets of the craft that allow brands and creators to really impact audiences and culture through the work that they put out. I'm your host, Dan Granger. I'm the CEO and founder of Oxford Road. We have a very special group lined up to talk to you today. And we're going to be going deep. We're going to do a deep dive into the subject of attribution, which if you're just interested in the podcast industry, attribution probably isn't a big thing that you're thinking about as you go about your days. But if you work inside of the business and you're responsible for showing impact to brands, or if you are a brand and you want to know how your investments are performing, attribution is a really important topic. So we're going to look deeply at this. And to do so, we have some of the finest members of the audio community sitting with us today. We're going to start out with two key members of the Oxford Road team who have been here for many years. Giles Martin, the elusive Giles Martin, who we've talked about many times. You know, the serious listeners to this podcast know that Giles has been a topic, even though he's never attended before. And so we have Giles with us today, finally, who's going to shed some light on really all things that are broken in the world. And then we also have Kyle Jelinek, who is the editor-in-chief of The Influencer. He also, his day job is working at the agency, and Kyle's been with us for basically a decade, since the beginning. And so they're going to share their perspectives. Welcome, guys. I'm glad to have you here. And we're really the warm-up act, but this is big progress. Like the fact that we're here right now, I'm really grateful to have you. So welcome and thank you.
Excellent to be here.
So yeah, I mean, the fact that we have Giles here, it's been a long time coming.
Exciting times.
Yeah. So why don't we just talk about that for a minute? I had to play soccer like a child. I haven't played soccer since I was in probably elementary school. And I went to a soccer game and participated just as a way to horse trade a little bit with Giles. When Giles is international, he's a man of mystery. You can hear that he's British. One other piece of trivia about Giles is that he actually went to Oxford. We are Oxford Road, but none of the rest of us came close to going anywhere like Oxford, let alone Oxford. Giles actually is the only person that somewhat legitimizes our name because he actually went to school there. But I've been begging for him to come on this show and participate for months, maybe years, and he's always had an issue. He's always had an issue.
I needed to see your soccer skills. I mean,
and they were bad enough that you felt
worth it.
He felt, yeah, he felt guilty enough watching me on the field. He said, "That's so pathetic. I think hey, whatever it takes to get you here." So, just glad that you're here, buddy. Thanks for showing up. And Giles, by the way, so his day job around here is really head of analytics. And I don't know, it may be a longer title than that, but he oversees really all of our data operations. and trying to figure out how to make sure that we can keep brands on the cutting edge of what's possible. Technically, we work in a very oddball industry that's kind of wedged somewhere between the old traditional media world and the new digital world. And we're trying to cross that chasm as an industry. And Giles is really our Sherpa in that process. And so that's his main contribution. So anyway, good that you're here. We're right in your wheelhouse today, talking about analytics and attribution. Typically, when somebody asks a hard question about analytics or attribution, the first response is, well, let me get Giles and see if he can help us with this. So very, very, very popular guy. So we're going to have a brief chat about analytics and attribution. And at some point during this conversation, we're going to diverge from whatever we're talking about suddenly and be joined by somebody else who's very special. And that is our good friend, longtime friend, Allan Jones. Allan is the CEO and founder of a company called Bambee, which offers outsourced HR solutions to small businesses across this country. And Allan was the former chief marketing officer for ZipRecruiter. So when they first made a play in audio, we were partners with Oxford Road was the agency at that time, and Allan was the CMO. And I think we were able to make history together. And he's been on this show before talking about other topics, but we had an experience with him in the last, I'd say, 6 months with his business, Bambee, where I think we're able to break new ground in the world of attribution and introduce something that I think has been under our noses for a while, but a lot of people have not been participating in. And we're going to spread the good news about what the discovery was. And like, Allan's just a really charismatic guy. He's a brilliant guy. And wherever he takes the show, that's where it's going to land. So this is probably part one of a multi-part conversation. And I'll just throw out some introductory topics for you guys, and we're going to talk about those until he's with us. So off we go. Attribution, guys, what is it? Like, how do you even define attribution?
Boy, I'm going to have to leave this to
You're already going to yeah, there you go. All right.
I mean, I'll state it as the way I see it. And I'm just a California State University, Fullerton education. So very far
prestigious
from
university.
The bottom line is any kind of trackable metrics that we have, like that are undeniable, there's a multiplier involved. And like at the end of the day, we're trying to figure out, we know that nobody's going to do what we tell them to do in the ads. And so trying to figure out and quantify, okay, so those who don't do exactly what we tell them to do and maybe go through other areas, how do we actually quantify that? And that's like been basically the bane of my existence for the last 9 years. And that's why we've got Giles and why we brought him on board.
Now, Kyle, before you got into this field, you were a radio guy like me. Working for a different company, and you were working with a lot of small businesses, getting them to advertise on the radio. Was this not a problem for them in that world before? Do you feel like this is unique to our industry, this problem?
Well, I think it's just a bigger scale when we came here, or when I came here, at least, like on the local radio level. It's like, how many leads you get this week? And then they say, we got 17. You're like, great. Let's keep going. And when you start working in this space, it's a different story, and you start to look at different signals. And the end of the day is like, anybody who says we've solved attribution for fill in the blank, anybody who says those first words, just discount everything they say after that, because it's not true. Bottom line is, we're all looking at signals and trying to figure out, based on these signals, what's the source of truth. And that's our job, is trying to suss out the truth from the noise.
And when you talk about nobody listens to what we say to them, I think just to interpret for those that may not be tracking, when you run an ad, you hear these ads, especially in podcasts, that, at the end of it, it's like, go to abcwidgetcompany.com/save or whatever. Correct. And then what that means is we're telling people via the host what action we want them to take at the end of the commercial. And what I think you mean by that is the listeners do not listen to those instructions most of the time. And so we have to go through all types of hurdles and gymnastics to get other sources of data that will let us triangulate to the actual response rates that we see from an ad. I'll just add, I think, my point of view on attribution is really, it's just about the assignment of credit and the age old question of, I know half my ads are working, I don't know which half. This is always, it's always been an industry problem. And to your point, nobody has ever fully solved it, but I think we have to find the best of a lot of broken methods to try to get to a more perfect. It's like our country. We're looking for a more perfect union of show level data and performance data to try to marry those things and make decisions and try to grow. Giles, anything you would add about what attribution is?
I mean, I think the additional context you just provided, Dan, is good. I've had enough of hearing the Wanamaker quote over the years at this point. We
all have,
but it's an age-old problem. And if any of you saw Mad Men, those were certainly the good old days of advertising where you could spend a few tens of millions of dollars and nobody would ask you any nasty questions about what those dollars actually did for the business. And I think, back in the day, your CEO or your CFO used to just perhaps be able to see in the overall business that the tide was rising, or just sort of had a feel that it was working, or I don't know, maybe they couldn't tell it was working because around the 1980s, people started asking more harder questions. But it wasn't just about audio, it was about all channels. And we work to solve attribution problems in audio primarily for our clients because that's where we're primarily focused. But we also are happy to get involved with them on tackling attribution challenges across any and all channels.
Well, yeah, in real time here, we are now joined by the main event, the star of our show here, my good friend, Allan Jones, longtime friend of the agency, really since the beginning. I'm going to tell one quick Allan Jones story and then we'll formally welcome him. But I watched a video recently that we did in 2015. It was a testimonial reel that we played. We did this huge anniversary event where we took over the top of the Roosevelt Hotel, and we were filled with brands and media people. And we played some clips of some people that we were working with. And Allan opens this up with this quote where he says, I don't wipe my ass unless the data tells me to. And so but he was making the point, I think, really succinctly, that if you've got a business, if you've got a startup and your job is to grow that business, you have to make data-driven decisions. And what I think Allan has a great story throughout the arc of his career is actually taking data, which everybody says that they do, and translating it into real world impact in amazing ways. And we've had the benefit of doing that with him across a couple different companies now. And so with that, I just want to say, Allan, welcome to the Media Roundtable. Welcome back to the Media Roundtable. I'm so grateful that you were able to join us.
Thank you for having me back. I'm surprised you had me back. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, they want me again. They want me again. More of me, more of this. No, I'm happy to be here, man. Are we recording already? Are we?
Oh, we're live. We're rolling.
Oh,
we're rolling. Yeah. You just dialed into the hotline, man. Oh. We pulled you right into the show. So now here's what I will say. We do have editing powers. So if you say something and you're like, I don't want that on record, go back and cut that out. We will do that. And I make no apologies to the audience. It is our privilege to do so. But I have a feeling that won't be the case. Allan, you were on the show a couple years ago. It was, once people get a little taste, they're probably going to want to hear more of you. If you actually went back to June 3rd, 2020, we were on a much more serious topic because that was right in the wake of George Floyd. You came on and shared your perspective as a CEO, as a founder, as a marketer, and as a Black man in America, and really gave some incredible perspective about not only your background, but, you know, how do we even interpret these events, and what can we all do from where we sit in different walks of life to try to balance our business objectives with our personal values to make an impact. So it was a heavy show, but it was a deep conversation, and it was really, really powerful. So for anybody that is interested, that was the 6th show we ever put out, and it was very, very good. So I'm glad to have you back. This show's a little bit lighter, and we're talking about the fun topic about data analytics and attribution in advertising. And fortunately, we have some very fun people involved in the conversation. First and foremost, you. So you and I met a decade ago. And do you mind just catching everybody up a little bit on where you were at the time, and how you were able to use data to create an incredible growth story that I think made a dent in this whole ecosystem? I mean, you really made a big impact early. So tell us a little bit about that, and let's go back to the start.
Yeah. So first of all, it's good to see you guys all, and Dan, always good to talk to you. The episode you're talking about for Media Roundtable, episode 6, was actually just to hit on that topic for 1 second, it was actually a catalyst point for me as a leader. And I don't know that I've ever told you this, but it was the first time, you know, that moment in time forced me to grapple with how much of me I should bring through my leadership, right? How much of my Blackness should I bring through my leadership? And it was the first time ever in my career that I was faced with the question of, you know, do I lead with my skin color in this moment? And there was one, it was powerful. 2, it made me answer a bunch of questions about my leadership style that I hadn't asked myself before, or that I thought that I had some time to not have to answer. And those, you know, 1 and 2 led to 3, which is I don't lead any other way now. And so it fundamentally changed me as a leader, to be completely honest with you. So thank you for that. I've never said that to you.
You know, and we've, you know, hundreds of conversations about everything in the world. I didn't know that was a turning point in your leadership style. So that's incredible.
Well, you know, and I know this is not, but just really quick, like,
yeah.
For a long time, as a person that is of a marginalized kind of class, whether that be, you know, LGBTQ, female, or African American, whatever you may have it, we just want to prove that we are just as good as everybody else. And so, like, you're leading with your talent for as long as you possibly can, just so they let you in the door. And then, you know, eventually, I think you realize that there's more power in telling leading with the entirety of you, not just parts of you. Anyways, how do we meet? So we said this was a light conversation. Here we go. So I was a ripe age of 26 years old. I was just coming off of running my very first company as CEO directly into the ground. I did that for 3 years. It was from 23 to 26. It was a very long fall. And I found myself as the chief marketing officer at the time, bootstrapped, cash flowing, 20 employee sized ZipRecruiter based out of Santa Monica, California, hungry for a win and dying to prove that as an operator, I could really drive growth. And I just so happened to stumble upon this other kid named Dan Granger, just having left his big boy job as an account manager for iHeartMedia, having the grit and the nerve and the audacity to start his own company, and decided he was going to call it Oxford Road. Had no clients. I'm just kidding. I'm not sure if you had no clients, but for the sake of the story, I had 0 clients, and I was.
You've always been the only pebble on my beach, I'll tell you that, but there may have been another couple partners in the process, but that was behind the scenes. Yeah. So keep going.
I don't mind if you lie to me. Just always tell me I'm pretty. So thank you for that comment. And I think too, we hitched our wagons together, and I had a lot to prove. You had a lot to prove. And sometimes the universe just aligns where you've got folks that have the right energy, the right tenacity, and the right ability and the hunger to prove themselves right and other people wrong in tandem. And sometimes you catch fire. And so I think ZipRecruiter, that opportunity was lightning in a bottle. But I think Bambee has proven that we were the lightnings in the bottles.
And can you talk about, so when you started at ZipRecruiter, taking on the marketing function, which had no growth practice beyond maybe like low-hanging fruit on affiliate and maybe some search or something like that, but to actually go out and place those bets where you're like, all right, we don't have a lot to play with. This test has to work. And every dollar, like your future growth depends on it. I mean, you were pre-Series A at that time, right? And now we're talking about a publicly traded company that I think has stayed true to the playbook that was established on your watch. I mean, what do you feel like it was that unlocked that growth for you, and how did the data and to the extent that you remember your attribution focus make a real impact on the growth trajectory of that business?
Yeah, so here's the, man, I love when I talk about things that I've talked about 95 times before, but you have completely new thoughts. Like, how I know that the kind of the principles around data driving every single decision are true and work and should be followed in practice is because, I joined ZipRecruiter. They did not have a marketing practice. They'd never made a senior marketing hire ever. Marketing at the time was a single SEM search manager reporting into the finance lead. And here I was, a ex-product guy, ex-CEO, joining the company, having never, ever run a marketing campaign a day in his life. And so how is it that you can take those two things that so clearly juxtaposed, right? A no marketing practice whatsoever, guy who's never run a marketing organization a day in his life, build one of the most successful direct to SMB marketing campaigns in the country, lead a strategy that led ZipRecruiter to being the largest buyer of audio advertisement in the United States out of any other brand, not just tech. That ultimately led a company that was pre-Series A to a $2 to $3 billion market cap business. Like, well, how did you do that? Well, the only thing I had was the data, right? I didn't have any experience, it was just the data, and it was my safety net. And so we leveraged data to help me make every single possible decision. When you came to me and said, hey, look, I think you guys should test and try audio. And I took it kind of back to the team there. They said, you can't we can't test on audio because, you can't track it. I said, okay, well, what if we could track it? If I told you that on the other side of this mountain, there was 1 million customers for you, but you just needed a roadmap to get into them, what if I told you I could build you the roadmap with data? And so we built an attribution methodology that became our roadmap that basically answered every question. Do you run on Rachel Maddow or do you run on Bill Handel? Do you run at 2 p.m. or do you run at 4 p.m.? 5 ad spots per hour or 3, right? Every single question was answered because the data told us to. Now, you had some experience on top of that, which you brought to the table, and some instinct, which I think I brought to the table, and you've got a mean strategy.
And so much of it at the time was about having a signal and then having a back end system, because, you had the challenge, and look, you were covering all advertising channels, which you expanded, greatly, but just keeping it about audio for a minute. This was at a time when there was no digital attribution. There was no pixel in place, right? So we really had to rely on signals that would come from these vanity URLs for a B2B product, and then tie that back to a survey and look at the ratio between the survey responses and the vanity responses. Do you remember what it was like as a marketer looking at that and having to decide what was enough to be acceptable to make decisions on? Because you have to have a certain amount of faith to operate in that environment.
Yeah. Can I add something to this question?
Yeah.
Just today, actually, we were talking to a very large prospect who, often this is the case with very large companies, they're unwilling or unable to put a pixel on their site, at least easily. And so I found myself in a situation where I have been a number of times at Oxford talking about, the merits of vanities and survey results, survey type approaches. And among a lot of marketers and probably CEOs as well, there's a perception that methodologies like that, they're not digital methodologies, they're perhaps untrustworthy. Now, I'm not saying that I would subscribe to that. I obviously don't. But, it's not, it doesn't seem very sophisticated. It doesn't seem like there's a very complex, model behind it or anything like that. And I think a lot of marketers and often executives sort of tend to look down on it for those reasons. But you're somebody who has a lot of experience with this. And so especially as not just as a ex-CMO, but also as a CEO, I'm really interested to hear your perspective about a methodology that is sort of not perceived to be so trendy and not perceived to be so valuable, and what your journey with that, this is what Dan was getting to, what your journey with that has been like through the years, like getting comfortable, and then how comfortable were you, and how do you feel about it now, given there is different tech in the space?
Yeah, so I'll answer both those in tandem. Nothing and no one is trustworthy until they are trustworthy. So you know what I mean? So did I trust the attribution methodology at ZipRecruiter initially and then just, advocate for $1 million budget out of nowhere? Absolutely not. And so I think for us, and how did it feel? And then how did I come to trust it? To answer the questions in order, it was invigorating because first we said, what are all the problems with attribution? Well, not everyone goes to the vanity URL. Some people go directly to Google and Bing. How do you track those? And then, right. And so there were all these issues. So we said, okay, great. Well, let's take them one by one. Sounds good. Everyone goes to the vanity URL. Great. If everyone's going to the vanity URL and I'm running 5 different ad spots on 5 different, media types or personalities, then I will at least know if I got 0 or something from vanity URL. And so if I want to get into a channel that is larger than television, incrementalizing my way to trust was the way to do it. So first I was like, okay, well, look, I've got 3 folks on Rachel Maddow. I use her because she's one of the ones that stuck out of my head back then. And then there was a question of performance of a media type. So then I could see that, okay, of the people that heard us on Rachel Maddow, then went to the vanity URL, holy crap. I don't know if I can curse on this children's network.
You can.
Holy fuck. The conversion rate on Rachel Maddow is like 5x, what it was for SEM. So now I've got like a little bit of insight, and I've got opportunity kind of on 2 vectors: the size of the potential channel if I can crack it, and the fact that I now know that conversion is double, triple what it was on my other media channels, thereby making my incrementalization to trust way worth it. So I kept going. Okay, great. So then some people go to Google. Well, how many more? How many went to Google? And so because of the opportunity on the other side of audio, it doesn't matter how sexy it is. What's really sexy? Growth. And so, you incrementalize your way to trust because of the growth factor on the other side. I think we were just a believer. And so some of these, what'd you call them? Corporations, fuddy-duddy non-believers, whatever. They have to be willing to say, like, on the other side of this channel is probably a lot of growth. So how much am I willing to put into that, given the size of the opportunity? You're not talking the 4th largest channel. You're talking the largest, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies: Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com.
Dislike the thought of your address, phone number, and your family's information being sold online? Imagine having your own private detective who scours the internet for data brokers selling your personal info. When they find it in the wrong hands, they help you take it back. McAfee Plus is just like that. A private detective helping you take control of your data and privacy. Get all-in-one protection with McAfee Plus and learn how to protect your everything at McAfee.com/podcast.
Now is the time to accelerate innovation. T-Mobile for Business is powering Formula One Las Vegas Grand Prix operations and epic fan experiences with secure, reliable 5G connectivity. Because an event this big and this fast deserves a network that can set the pace. See what our 5G advanced network solutions can do for your business at T-Mobile.com/now. View 5G device coverage and access details at T-Mobile.com.
Well, and so there's an interesting choice that I think marketers have to make if they're going to crack audio, because they come in and pixels are maybe a different topic, but the tried and true is to properly execute the survey and signal combination, which is harder than it sounds, but it is generally the historic path to getting there. But there's always this temptation that came out before we were in the business and keeps showing its face with new packaging, which is time series analysis. When the promise is, if we just feed in the times that ads dropped, and then we feed in the incremental session lift on a website homepage, we can correlate those two things and tie it back to actual insertions. And in our experience, it always gives you a false positive or a false negative, but it's so tempting because it has the allure. It looks like that's very close to digital marketing, like that's very reliable. You had to kind of work through that, and to overcome that is thinking that there might be some more sophisticated way. Do you remember grappling with that one?
Yes, because the other difference in the channel is, whereas a social media performance marketing or search, they drive a tremendous amount of top of the funnel volume. And so when you're applying a time series analysis mindset to audio, you're assuming that audio is going to drive the same number of top line visits. It does not. You can run $10 on Facebook and it drive 1 million visitors to your website. And if you're thinking you're going to apply that same thing to audio, that's not the case. So just looking at one ad and a spike in visits you're not going to get it. You're not going to get the volume you think. The volume exists in the percentage of folks who eventually do register who buy, right? Because it's a much higher converting channel. And so for the leap of faith you have to be willing to make is that directional has to be good enough initially. And an over precision can actually block you out of a pretty big opportunity. You've got to be willing to say that that's okay. That doesn't mean, I didn't care initially if Rachel Maddow worked really well at 1 p.m. or 4 p.m. I just care that she worked relative to Howard Stern, right? Those are my relative concerns. And I cared about the overall cost of my marketing engine in terms of an efficiency perspective. So yeah, I think being overly precise can block people out of the channel. Same thing with television, by the way. Similar behavior in terms of visits.
Yeah, I would say like when this agency started, Allan, I would call you a few times actually to jump on calls with advertisers who didn't really understand the post-purchase survey and like how to really start to quantify who was coming in through podcasts, who was coming in through radio, and so on and so forth. What I've been really impressed with was like your work with Dan recently on taking that kind of basic, kind of rudimentary attribution model with the survey analysis and taking the next step with potentially a way to approach this that eliminates the use of vanity URLs or promo codes altogether. Can you talk a little bit about like what you've done now in the next step?
Yeah, Dan, we're talking about you playing ball with us a little bit here for a period of time, right, on the show? Are we doing that on
Absolutely.
the show?
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, so I think I'll just tee up for that, and then we'll move into the kind of big marketing reveal. But Allan called me with a very, very creative opportunity, and I'm going to let you talk about how that came to pass.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I needed a CMO, and our primary growth channels are audio, and Dan is the best possible person I could have thought of to come and do the job. And I called him with a crazy idea of splitting his time between running his own agency and being my interim CMO. Initially, I think there was a laugh and then like a weird sound that sounded like a cringe. And then I said, wait, hear me out. And I kind of got through the whole thing. And then I heard a sound that was reminiscent of, intrigue. And I think we eventually got there. And the reason I think that context is important is because, Dan really came here and drove a lot of the innovation with me around not using vanity URLs alone anymore. But what's interesting is the change. So because ZipRecruiter was one of the first to run on audio, the use of vanity URLs was 30 to 40% of your traffic would go to vanity URLs. But what has changed in the decade since kind of our efforts at ZipRecruiter is the number of technology companies who now leverage audio for growth, right? It's insane, right? A lot of folks are using a similar strategy. Now, that's good for audio, but what it's done is it has given the listener ad blindness around the call to action. Right. So less people go to the vanity URL because they're just used to hearing it all the time now. So they just go directly to the domain or they go to Google. And so the mechanism that we had used as the kind of nucleus of our attribution, which was vanity, was dwindling in terms of its potency and ability to give us guidance on how things were performing. And that's just the nature of an evolving channel. And so we were, at Bambee, I found myself in this weird predicament of wanting to scale audio, but not being able to leverage the system I had built to scale it before at a previous now multi-billion-dollar company. And so Dan came in with some crazy ideas. I think, Dan, you'd be better to talk through the specifics of what you did, but it's worked beautifully.
Well, I think first and foremost, nothing happens if you don't have a team that can facilitate it. So, Allan had the idea of bringing in an agency guy, at least on an interim basis, to introduce some change into the marketing group. which, you just for clarification, Allan is the CEO of a very large and growing Series C fintech company that any small business should be taking a look at for HR support on a number of levels.
I would also suggest that we are an HR tech company. The only reason I correct you is because fintech multiples are in the toilet, so I want no association.
Indeed. So anyway, so Allan had a very innovative, data-driven culture, and I say that because truly, we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of companies that were backed by a VC. Okay, and everybody I've ever talked to opens up their self-introduction by saying, we're a very data-driven organization. They're not generally very data-driven organizations. I walk into Bambee and everything is charts and graphs, and double click on that, drill down on that, run an analysis on that. It is unbelievably data-driven is an understatement. And so hopping into that environment, it was cool to see what somebody that had done that in a marketing organization was able to do, applying that across the board. But I think, Allan, you've had a very difficult challenge in that you are one of the most successful marketers in this field. And then you kind of had to take your superpower and set it aside and have other people operate it. So I was glad to get to hop in and take a ride and kind of play undercover client for 6 months and find out what everybody is dealing with on the other side of the table. It's hard shit. It is not easy. But one of the things that was possible from the team, I mean, you've got more analysts than anything else. What the team was able to execute that took some doing was to basically figure out how to re-engineer the lead generation process. Remember, this is business to business. So you're not selling a $40 CPA product. You're trying to get a very small number of people to go to a vanity URL. And you're trying to make decisions based on very low samples of data and extrapolate very important conclusions from that. So we had a challenge in that we wanted more confidence in the data that we were seeing. So what we did was we effectively took the drop down, the how'd you hear about us, which is now standard practice for any company that's transacting online that's worth their salt. And that was already tight. But then we added a secondary drop-down menu that said, or a secondary question, which was what show or station did you hear us on if they had selected audio in the how'd you hear about us? Now, from that question, people have done that a long time, but they used to do it with a list of 100 shows, which was never going to give you anything reliable because everybody's going to pick the first one. They don't want to read through. They're going to skip it. By using predictive text and having the team preload every possible permutation of spelling on every show that they had ever advertised on, we're able to increase the visibility and increase our confidence in every purchase that was being made by over 700%. Because through predictive text, if I heard about you on the Kyle Jelinek show and I put in KY, all of a sudden I've got, 2 or 3 options. I just pick. It's very clean. And what the team at Bambee was adamant about was that we didn't just make this change, but that we did a clear A/B test, baking off an even number of impressions on each so that we could monitor the customer journey and make sure that they didn't abandon the conversion process because we asked them to take that extra step. And what we found out, there was zero loss. We saw absolutely no diminishment. And so as a result of that, we're now able to, instead of taking 2 or 3 or 4% of an audience who's going to respond to an ad, and they're going to respond by going to Google 97% of the time. The other 2 or 3%, they go to the vanity. And now you got to make big conclusions and decisions based on small data. Now we have a much bigger data set because everybody's answering that question. And then the secondary question, most people are answering. So we got very, very reliable information. But that was all a byproduct of, I think, us just doing what we do. Yeah. We were pushing, and you had built, Allan, the team that could execute against that thing and quickly and with precision. And there's a lot to be said for that, because you can give somebody all the answers. That doesn't mean they can execute them.
It's totally right. I mean, it's also, when you're spending, you're talking millions of dollars a month in budgets. the precision difference in what the kind of predictive, I mean, it's two things, right? It's predictive text, but it's also like the spelling permutation, which is the smart part. The number of spelling permutations, you could spell the same name 19 different ways and still get the same kind of data bucket. It's made our marketing really, really efficient and clear. And there's a bunch of stuff that happened last year, but like our company right now is growing, 200% year over year on ARR. We are having the fastest growth period year over year on a quarterly basis than we've ever had. And a lot of that is on the back of audio. And so, yeah, it's been really fun. By the way, I think the old Allan Jones ism you guys pointed out was something to the effect of, I don't wipe my ass unless the data tells me to. I've grown up. Okay. I was 26. I was cracked. I will say the new one is probably, I don't care about your opinion. I only care about your opinion on the data. Right. So like, don't just generally tell me what you think. Tell me what you think about what the data is telling you. I find that creates a container in what people focus on and talk about. Yeah. So dude, by the way, Dan, I want to publicly thank you for being our interim CMO. It brought a level of vigor at this company that we are riding into this year, man. It was awesome.
Well, for all the time I felt like I was faking it, I'm honored to hear you say that, and I'm glad it was a positive experience. And I feel like the best testament to what we were able to do together is that we're still friends, and that always was the biggest piece of it. But it's nice that we're able to keep growing the relationship anyway. I know we don't have you for long. I'm going to throw one more at you that, depending on how many minutes before Zephyr starts pulling in the hook, there's a lot of companies and a lot of founders and a lot of marketers that are facing the challenges that you faced, that you successfully navigated. Starting with Attribution, what advice do you have for the person that's trying to get into audio? They know that there's something there. They just don't have the faith or the vision or the path. What advice do you give them?
That's a good one. Two things. Find a firm that you trust, who you think is competent, and I like to choose my agencies like Goldilocks, right? Not too small, not too big, because I think when the firm is so big, you get lost in the sauce. When they're too small, they don't have the experience to be able to kind of help you navigate the way you need to. So you need one that's just right for your mission and for where you are in terms of the stage of the company. The second thing is make sure all your marketers know SQL, which will disqualify 85% of all the marketers that work at technology companies. But if you have a performance marketing team, they need to know SQL and they need to know Excel, because they can be really creative at applying digital tactics to offline media in ways that can give you confidence and relieve your anxiety about what steps you should take in a given channel. Don't hire a product marketer to run your audio. Like, treat audio just like you would a digital channel, but be willing to change the framework you use to measure success, because they're not the same. And the last one, I don't know, just get some courage, try something big.
Love that.
Can I add one more question? So I work with a lot of advertisers who, were hanging their hats on like a lot of these like very high level pixel-based attributions that, there's a lot of question about the validity of that. And what you're using right now with the survey base is, I think, in comparison, relatively low tech, but it seems to be working for you. What would your advice be to advertisers or marketers who are looking at like all of the available attribution options and like looking at potentially something that's a little bit more low tech as like the source of truth, and how to kind of fight through that?
Yeah, I mean, so even though what we're using is low tech, I would say that it's not low intellectual capacity. Like it's actually fairly intellectual horsepower. It's because we talked about half of it, but there's also like another part that like has to look at traffic by channel and decide how much credit to give audio based on if someone came from SEM and we're using a bunch of math to make the right determination on how much credit Facebook should get for audio and vice versa. And so low tech, yes, but like high intellectual horsepower. But the advice I would give is if you can't understand how it works, it's too complicated because it's not that hard. It's not, you've got companies talking about, oh, we use Greek math in order to, it's like, okay, well, A, don't speak Greek. And B, like, how about regular math and logic? And so for all of our attribution methodologies, the bigger the team gets, the smarter they get, and they get better and smarter than me. And so usually if they're having to explain to me our attribution methodology, it takes me a couple turns because I'm not in it anymore, and they make little tweaks and changes, and we'll spend an hour writing it on the whiteboard. But if I can't understand it in 60 minutes, then it's too complicated. And so that would really be my advice. Like it should be easy, and if you're just starting a new budget, like if you're just starting out and you're not running on like 6 different channels, if like audio is one of 2, you should be able to explain your attribution or get it explained to you in 10 minutes or less in a way you understand. If you're running 6 channels and they all play off each other and they have halo effect, it gets a little bit more complex, right? But it's not Einstein work.
All right. Well, listen, I think one of the things you said, like, it helps to be smart. It helps to be to give the time to understand what the options are. But at the end of the day, like, I think one of the things you exhibit, in addition to creativity and unique perspectives, is that you got guts. And I feel like one of the big things that marketers don't often take inventory of is I think they see their job as risk management sometimes more than as the purpose is to show results that grow. And you've never been short on that. And I think that's probably been what's made you successful as a marketer, and also what's made you successful as an entrepreneur. I mean, what you're doing with Bambee, to be doubling in this environment and as a Series C stage company, is nothing short of phenomenal. So I think for a lot of reasons, I'm hoping that the valuations catch up with that quick. And I know that you were already generous to give us the time that you did. I promised I wouldn't keep you more than 30 minutes. I've already started to break that promise. So so let me just say thank you on every level possible.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Can I leave you with one anecdote?
Oh, as many as you got. We're here.
The last anecdote I'll say before I get out of here is, the CEO of ZipRecruiter was a longtime friend and is a great CEO. And when I went into his office as CMO and I said, hey, I want $150,000 to test audio. This is in 2013. He said, he debated it and he talked to his partners about it. But when he was about to approve it, he said to me, if this doesn't work, I'm going to fire you. And I said, well, if I don't drive growth, you're going to fire me anyways. And so I think the anecdote there is important because you're right. Your job as a marketer is to drive growth, not to be safe, not to drive growth in the way that maximizes the likelihood of keeping your job. Your job is to drive growth. And I think if you want growth, the best pathway possible is through audio. Just do it with eyes wide open.
Wow. This is mandatory listening for really now all marketers. So thank you for that. All right, guys, did we miss a spot, or do you feel like we can let Allan off the hook?
Oh, we can have like 4 more podcasts just recapping everything Allan has said.
That's true. We're going to exegete the text now.
Yeah.
For a series. All right. Thank you, Allan.
Right, thanks.
All right. I love you. Thank you. I'll talk to you later. Okay. Bye. Allan Jones. So, I mean, if we could, I'd have Allan on to talk about just about any topic, and he's going to do an incredible job. But because this is part 1 of multi-part for us, anything that jumps out at you guys that you think is a key takeaway for other marketers that are listening?
I just want to underscore the fact that, I remember the time 9 years ago, getting Allan on client calls and having him explain the survey methodology that we used and still use to a great extent to this day. And the fact that like, here we are 9 years later, and there's so many different ways to like skin the cat. Like, how do we know what happened from this integration that we did on audio? And here we are still 9 years later, so many different opportunities, but at the end of the day, it's kind of the same thing. It's a little bit of a plus one with the secondary, but it's not all that hard. And that's what I love about like Allan's approach is like, it doesn't take, a lot of crazy numbers to really get to the bottom of it. Like if it makes sense to you in your head, it's probably the right way to go. And he's providing a pretty easy way to get to attribution, which seems to be pretty infallible, which is pretty cool.
Giles, what about you?
I mean, there's a lot I could say. He's got such a great, unique perspective as a CMO and ex-CMO and now CEO who's been like in the gritty trenches of getting started with attribution all the way up to, I don't have time to, worry about attribution. You guys have to figure it out. Other than he needs to understand it, which I think is fantastic. But I think my favorite quote, which is going to stay with me, is him saying like he doesn't care about whether
your opinion
methodology is sexy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Is we feel like sometimes we feel like the answer has to be complicated, or is it is
exactly.
And so we walk in with this like really basic, like the same way they do things like polling, and you're just asking people a question and getting answers back, and you're making use of the sample set. And a lot of times I think we outsmart our own common sense, as our creative director will often say. Yeah. And he's willing to set aside, I think, the hubris of thinking that if it's not complicated and confusing, then it isn't good. And just saying, this is going to be good enough for us. The kind of closing thought on attribution for today, from my point of view, is something I heard. Allan may have actually said it to me, but somebody said a long time ago, attribution is sort of like religion. Eventually, you just kind of have to accept that there are going to be some problems in any road you take, but you just have to pick and decide how you're going to live your life. And I think that that's true for many methodologies. And I think as we go deeper into this topic with our team, and further content about this, I want us to, really talk about the elephant in the room, which is pixel attribution, which we do a lot of. There is no conversation in 2023 in attribution around audio that you don't have to, think about whether or not pixeling is an option for you, and how to think about that and how to go about that. That's a conversation we need to have. Econometric modeling, more about time series analysis, baseline lift. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, as you said, Kyle, and none of them are perfect and none of them are just right. And we're talking about maybe the most simplistic version, but also probably the most useful. And we'll get to unpack that. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that I think for brands to make a decision that you're going to find one that is good enough to operate against. And like Allan said, directional enough that you can do what you need to do, because otherwise people get paralyzed. They don't move the business forward and they don't do their core job, which is to grow the business. And so it's a great conversation for us to be having. I'm really glad that you guys were able to sit in on this part. We're going to hear more of your voices on the next one. And I'm totally leveraging this to get 2 out of Giles instead of just 1. So yes. He thinks he's filled his obligation for 2023. He has not. We will at least continue this conversation as we get a chance. Next week, we're likely going to give you a special emergency episode where we talk about the things we learned from Podcast Movement, which is happening in Las Vegas this week. I'll be speaking in a session on brand safety and suitability and on another panel as well. So if you're in town, come to that. But if not, we will be talking about that next week, and then we'll try to have you guys back on to cover that. So thank you all for joining the Media Roundtable Industry Edition. This show is still dedicated to our mission of mobilizing marketers to advance truth and civility in journalism, and our Industry Edition gives you the tools to make that possible. We want you not just to know the news and the best practices, but to use them for good. If you're a marketer and you're looking to balance your business objectives with your brand values, and you want a team who can make your campaign successful through the right strategies, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com/ just kidding, we don't use /. You subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Thank you to our guests, Allan, and our panelists, Kyle and Giles, and Haley, and the team at Podcast One, as well as Jennifer Lane. And as always, influence responsibly.
Dislike the thought of your address, phone number, and your family's information being sold online? Imagine having your own private detective who scours the internet for data brokers selling your personal info. When they find it in the wrong hands, they help you take it back. McAfee Plus is just like that. A private detective helping you take control of your data and privacy. Get all-in-one protection with McAfee Plus and learn how to protect your everything at McAfee.com/podcast.
If you travel, you know when it comes to love.
See you soon.
Can't wait. The sky is no limit. You know with your Delta Amex card, being oceans apart means meeting in Aruba. And booking a war travel with your card means saving 15% on Delta flights. You know kissing under the Bridge of Sighs guarantees eternal love. Because you're the long-distance lovebirds. It's why you're a Delta SkyMiles Platinum American Express card member. If you travel, you know. Take off 15 discount not applicable to partner-operated flights or taxes and fees. Terms apply. Visit go.amex/you know.